not far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Aloha, everyone. This is Larry Camp, and welcome to the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast, which just happens to come with a side of Hawaiiana. Nobody Knows Your Story is a podcast which I believe will impact each listener in a positive way. As you listen to the experiences that have transformed, shaped, and guided each guest, perhaps you'll better understand your own personal journey. Some will surprise, some will make you question, and some will inspire, but all will leave you in a better place for listening in. As for the Hawaiiana, well, that's just a big part of my life story. So I invite you to check in from time to time, or better still, add Nobody Knows Your Story to your list of favorite podcasts. You'll enjoy hearing the life experiences of people just like you. Aloha, friends, and welcome back to Nobody Knows Your Story. We just heard Waikiki Hula from Moanalua, and mid-podcast, we're going to hear a little bit of sweetness from Hi'ikua. Speaking of Hi'ikua, I had Kalahua Krug, who wrote and sang that song, on the podcast back in November of 2022. If you enjoyed a little bit of sweetness, you're going to want to listen to Kalahua's story because we included several of his songs. And as always, please purchase and support the folks that you hear on Nobody Knows Your Story. Now, my guest today, of course, has her own unique story, but she's also involved in a movement that has become quite popular in our world of ever-increasing home prices. That, my friends, is a tease, an enticement, so to speak. Laura Lynch, welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story.
Hey, Larry, so good to be here with you.
We talked about that little tease there because, let's face it, ever-increasing home prices. I mean, I still do a little real estate. I've done that since 2005. And I see things that maybe others don't see, but man, the trend of upward cost on homes has been going on for really the last probably 15 years. And everybody keeps thinking it's going to hit and top and come back down, and maybe it will, but it hasn't so far.
Yeah, I think you're so right about that. In fact, I read an NPR article recently that I shared and talked about on LinkedIn that the prices of homes have gone up by 430, it's 423, but 430% in 40 years, which is double the rate of inflation. And so the sense that we have about homes being unaffordable is totally accurate and real. If you look at a starter home, back in the 70s, it was like $10,000 in San Jose, California. And now that same home is selling for, $1 million. So it's very significant, the cost of housing, and people are spending so much on keeping a roof over their head. And the reality is that's just a baseline need that we have, right? We need food, we need water, we need shelter. And sometimes a home can be a really fulfilling and meaningful thing if you have a lot of family and friends that are there all the time. But for most of us, our home is really where we just come at the end of our workday. And for us to have to expend so much energy on that one thing that's not really deeply fulfilling seems out of alignment. And that's why, I've personally made this transition to tiny living.
Well, there you go, folks. We're going to talk a little bit about tiny homes today. But you know what? Before we get into that, let's hear about your life, Laura, and maybe where you started out and, how you ended up where you ended up.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in southwestern Virginia, which is a really beautiful part of the country. I don't know that I necessarily appreciated it that much when I was young and living there because I didn't know anything different, but went to a really small school and had a small graduating class of 18 people and
Wow.
kind of came up in that high demand religion, right, environment, like you talk about so much. Kind of reached a point in my life where it was time to, move on and, become an adult. And my family didn't have any sort of savings for me to figure out my future path. So I spent, one semester in college on some college loans, and then that wasn't going to be feasible for the long term. And so I joined the Air Force, and that was my exit out of my hometown and a great experience. I was active duty for 6 years. 4 of those years I spent in northern Japan, which gave me a lot of amazing exposure to a different culture and a different place. And it was a great place to grow up, very safe. And I did a lot of camping and spent a lot of time outdoors, which is kind of a through line of my life. I feel so much more comfortable, being out in nature. And so then when I finished up my time in the Air Force, I had to figure out what I was going to do again with my life, which has been, I guess, an ongoing journey searching for what do I want to be when I grow up. And so not a lot of transitional skills. I was in military intelligence, which isn't something that I really wanted to continue. I kind of maybe lost confidence with the military, being that I was deployed, during 2001, and kind of had my concerns about the Iraq war and that sort of thing. And so I didn't want to stay in that intelligence world and be in the high pressure cooker of DC. So I kind of picked up what administrative skills that I had and got into the employee benefits world. And so worked for an employee benefits firm. And at the time I was married to my first husband. And so we ended up getting transferred out to Las Vegas, Nevada, to Nellis Air Force Base. And so then I had to kind of parlay my career over there. So got a job out in Las Vegas, and we bought our first home. And I guess this is kind of coming back to the home price thing. This was 2007 in Las Vegas. And of course, when I, came back from Japan and, kind of was figuring out, how to be an adult out in the civilian world, like one of the things that was clearly important was buying a home, right? That seemed
Sure.
like the thing you were supposed to do. So I bought the Home Buying for Dummies book, and I read up and I studied and I connected with a realtor in advance and saved up a bunch of money in CDs for down payment and did all the things you're supposed to do, use my VA home loan, and bought a house at the height of the market in Las Vegas, which was an area that was very bubbled at the time. So maybe that would have been fine if we had been in that house long term. But of course, military moves often. But for us, we split. So we got divorced in 2009. By that time, the house price had plummeted. And so a short sale is, kind of the result of that. Divorce, short sale, reset of life, quit my job out there to move back east to be closer to family. And so everything changed for me. And I guess, when you sort of get your bearings under you as an adult and you're charging through life and doing all the things you're supposed to do, and then to have a complete reset, career, relationship, housing, all the things back to ground zero. What am I going to do? That is definitely a pretty, significant crisis point. Went over to Florida where my grandparents were, because that was a good relationship for me to fall back on, and went back to school with the GI Bill. So restarted college, spent some time kind of reorienting myself to academics. I had been turned down to a college application that I had put in a few years prior. And when I was in private school, because there were not a lot, the class wasn't very big. And because I was in sort of this small environment, I never really understood my own ability to achieve academically. I guess I thought I was pretty like average or below average. And so then when I was turned down, my first college application, after the military, that really, kind of bothered my sense of what I could do. So getting back into school, I went to the University of Phoenix because they have open enrollment. So you don't have to have a good GPA in order to get in there. And then immediately I understood that, oh, I can do this. And I, raced through that completion of my undergrad degree and was an honors graduate, from that program. And so that really bolstered my self-efficacy around what I could achieve in life. From there, I got back into the working world in a more permanent way, which isn't something that I really was anxious to do, go back to a cubicle again, but that's what you're supposed to do, right? Go get yourself a corporate job and climb the ladder. So I ended up in the human resources space and did that in a retail corporation for a few years. And during that time, completed my master's degree, which was a really fun program. And again, a lot of confidence boost for me. It really was a lot of following the path of what you're supposed to do. And when I got reset or knocked off course or whatever, like doing everything I could to get myself back onto the path, right? The path of the college degree and the home ownership and all of the things. And that all was, I guess, on track. I became a financial advisor in 2017 in a corporate environment and was building my business and building up some wealth and whatever. And then all of a sudden the pandemic came, for all of us and reset our understanding of what's most important. And in that moment where, again, there was so much uncertainty, like what had happened in 2007, I was really worried about making my mortgage payment. At this point, I had upgraded my home and I had, a hobby farm going on. And yet my income was tied to what was going on in the real estate, or not in the real estate, in the stock market, right? So financial advisors are paid mostly paid by what's going on in market returns. And so my income was plummeting. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I still have this mortgage that I've taken on for myself so that I could have the American dream home, right, that I wanted. And yet I have this tiny house because a few years prior to that, and maybe we'll go back to this part of the story, but we had built a tiny house and put it out west because I really had missed living in the West. And so I'm like, why are we paying for this, house that's more than what we need space wise? And why are we worried and stressed in this moment of uncertainty? We could be living in a place where we have built and paid for cash, and it is sitting there with very little cost of living, and this pandemic thing could be going on and we would not be stressed about where is the money going to come from to pay the bills. And so that's when I was like, okay, this thing that I'm doing, this American dream that I am following to the letter is just not working for me. It's just not panning out. It's causing too much uncertainty and stress in my life. And I'm sacrificing my happiness and I feel trapped in this system. And how do I recreate my life to be more in alignment with what is most important to me and how I want to feel every day when I wake up, and what I want, the impact I want to be making? How do I restructure my life? And so that's where a 30-month project plan got created to get rid of the big house, move to the tiny house. 2 career changes had to take place for both me and my husband, Eric. We had to move all of his stuff, which is a lot of heavy equipment because he's a construction guy. So huge project to get us to this place where I'm now sitting, which is in our tiny home, and running my own business, which is, feels a lot better to me. And so it has been quite a journey of following the rules and doing what I was supposed to do, and then realizing that following the rules and doing what I was supposed to do just didn't fit.
Thinking about what you've just done, and you've kind of given us an outline there on your life in about 7 or 8 minutes. But you know what? There's a couple things that you said that really struck a nerve with me, because you kind of had this plan that you were following. And I think people 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, their lives kind of were mapped out for them through maybe through their parents, through their religion, through the education they were receiving at the time. It was like, you do this and this and this, and you'll get here. Now that plan isn't available for many of the younger people growing up today, because a big part of that plan was your home. We all had the dream of someday having home ownership, and we had the views in our minds of what that home would be. And many times it was the home like the one we grew up in. So yeah, things have changed. But before we get to any further down that path, I want to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about your upbringing. You were in Southern Virginia, I believe you said. Is that correct?
Yeah, Southwestern Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley.
Okay. You talked about the high demand religion, and if I remember, it was evangelical. Is that right? Evangelical Christian, I guess. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so as we've discussed, we both kind of have that past of a high demand religion. But how did that religious upbringing map and chart your life for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because, I think about life as kind of dominoes, and it's kind of like the first job that you get sort of somehow sets the course for where you go in life. And it may not be because you stay in the same, industry or what have you, but because you create a connection or relationship with a person who maybe then gets you to the next place. It's amazing how life will just like dominoes kind of fall out in front of you based on where you start. And so, I started, as I mentioned, in a small community, and my parents became very involved in their church when I was quite young. And so I spend the majority of my time at church, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Bible studies. And I went to a Christian high school as well. And I was in a private school for my middle school years too. I actually wrote about this on LinkedIn recently about how that my classroom was literally a closet. And so recently I was recording my podcast from my closet because we were packing up the house. And I was like, actually, I have a lot of experience working in closets. So yeah, being in that small environment, it does a few things, right? You feel, maybe more safe in some ways, and you're less exposed to all the challenges out there in the world. I think that was my parents' intention. They wanted to keep me safe from a world that seemed dangerous to them. And so all of my friends, all of my community, all of my relationships were, largely church-based. And so I feel like in many ways, I am still searching for that same sense of community that I had growing up. And it's harder now to find unless you are kind of staying in that environment, especially now in a world where we all feel more isolated and lonely. And, social media has sort of exacerbated that because people are defaulting to, technology to create their connections instead of going places and doing things. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had the opportunity to go do a square dance here in our little town in northern New Mexico. And that was just, it was sublime. It felt very, natural to me to like be in this, very sweaty barn with a bunch of people doing something that was really fun. And anyway, so yeah, so I would say that kind of that secure, like little nest of growing up that way protected me perhaps early. But then as soon as I hit the military, man, all bets were off, right? And I was wholly unprepared for what it meant to be in that environment. And so I feel like that there was a sort of a slingshot, or a pendulum swing that happened and took me, kind of to the other extreme that I wish hadn't happened for sure. And yet at the same time, I think that happens to a lot of folks when they, leave their church environment. They end up kind of exploring the whole other end of the pendulum.
Sure.
And looking back on it, I think that we all are kind of a tapestry woven together of all the threads of our life. And I think that there are positive things that certainly came out of that. I think that there are other things that aren't so positive, but everybody has that, both positive and not so positive threads in their life. But it definitely impacted kind of the way that I now am kind of coming back to the small community concept and wanting to be in a place where people know who I am and where I can build a reputation within the community of being, a reliable person who's, straight up, and, people know who I am at the farmer's market. Like, that feels comfortable to me because that's how I grew up, was in that small environment. But just kind of having a different belief system when I was a kid roaming through the woods that I grew up in. Like, I have a native belief in me that's earth-based, and that is related to, the trees communicating, which we now know happens through the mycorrhizal, the fungi networks, and, some ideas and imagination in the forest, and, being connected to the earth was more native to me. And now I get to really be closer to that from a spirituality perspective.
When you were talking about the farmer's market and people knowing you, and I think what that is that's that community that we all enjoy being a part of. And
Yes.
let's face it, high demand religion creates that community and does a very good job of that and taking care of that. And then when you leave that community, a lot of times it's like, now what? And so, like you say, that pendulum swings, and sometimes people go to the far extreme on the other side, which can be a little dangerous if you grew up in a bubble where everything was, you were protected, and then all of a sudden you're out of that bubble. So sometimes people, they can go a little wild, right? I mean, isn't it the Amish that give you a period of time? I think what is it called? Something with an
Rum
R.
singer, I think, or
Yeah, something like that, where they're like, okay, go out and sow your wild oats and have fun, and then return back and hunker down. And
yes,
of course, they lose a few during that process. But yeah, I totally understand. I can totally relate. I've seen the pendulum swing for some people very far. So another thing I wanted to talk about just for a moment, when we were talking about your youth again, is it's so funny because I'll send out a questionnaire many times before the podcast, and I'll get the answers back. And when I have the question of what were some of the things you enjoyed in your youth, you're the first person that ever said blueprints. I'm like, who draws blueprints when they're a youngster? But look where you are now. And so, and that's kind of my question many times, is the things that we do in our youth many times takes us down the path into our adulthood. And certainly, I'm not saying that it happened for you on that straight line, but certainly you came back to it. That I just found that very interesting, that you were doing blueprints in your youth.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a point sometimes in people's journey, maybe it happens further on. So people stay, in a nice path. Like, my brother, came out of the womb knowing he wanted to be an engineer, and that's what he is today. And for other people, they're not quite sure. They question, or they don't root into what is, really resonating with them when they were young. But then they eventually find their way back to it. And in fact, in the work that I do with folks, we do a values worksheet, and it is very much about identifying kind of those words that you would have tattooed on your head. What are the words you've been accused of being, right? These are the things that are deeply true to you. And that if you can stay close to those things, then you will feel very congruent with yourself. So my parents built their own house. My grandparents built their own house too. And I remember when my parents got the blueprints for the house that was being built when I was a kid, I was utterly fascinated with those blueprints. That was really cool. And so when I would, sit in class when I was a kid, instead of whatever people do in their notebook when they're bored, I would be sketching blueprint plans. Of course, not in a super professional way, but I just found that to be a really fascinating thing. And so then when I got to come back at age 39 and design my tiny house on graph paper, that to me was super fun. And right now I'm designing a studio greenhouse building that's going to be a passive solar adobe structure. And so this has been a great project for me. And I have my notebook with my graph paper, and I'm working on all the space planning and, where is everything going to go? And it's just, it lights me up, as you can tell. So yeah, it's one of my favorite pastimes, is to have a building to sketch out.
Passive Adobe solar structure.
Yes.
PASS. We'll call that's the acronym, PASS. Well, that'll be different for sure.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't become an architect.
Right? Right? If somebody had said, hey, here, Laura, here's $40,000, you can go to school to become an architect, maybe I would have considered that. But at the time, I was being very much funneled into sort of a missionary path, right? Like you know well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like because we become what we see around us, right? And so the people that were around me that were maybe enjoying their life were out traveling the world as missionaries. And I had an adventure travel kind of, thing too going on. I went to England when I was 16 on a missionary trip, which seems a little funny, but that's where we went. And then I went back to England again when I was 18. And I definitely wanted to travel. Like the Peace Corps would have been a great option, but, that wasn't within the sphere that I was in. And so my first attempt at college was teaching English to speakers of other languages, TESOL, in order for me to have something that I could bring to my missionary work. And so, of course, I only made it through one semester of college there before my parents said, hey, we're not going to take out any more loans. And I had to figure out, where do I go from here? But yeah, I think if someone had said to me, hey, look at this female architect over here that's doing so well, or if I had known somebody in that space, maybe I would have considered that, but we just do the thing that is seen in front of us. And that's why I think it's so important to take kids outside of their bubble and allow them to have exposure to other people and other places, because you can't imagine when you're 18 years old what path you want to go on unless you've seen it played out in front of you.
Yeah. Even though I and you have changed course several times throughout our lives, I'm glad that these things have happened, because I was so much of a sports fanatic growing up, to the point that I wanted to become a broadcaster. I mean, if I can't play sports, I at least want to talk about them. And I did that. And I followed that, that path. And I did it for a period of time. But I was okay leaving that field, because I felt like, well, I did what I wanted to do. Maybe it didn't really hit on all the levels I wanted, but I got close enough. And then I did this and I did that. And I always wanted to move to Hawaii and live full time in Hawaii. Well, it didn't work out that I stayed there forever, but I did it. And so I don't look back. And that's what I think we want when we get to kind of the end of our life. We don't want to look back and have regrets, things that we were passionate about, but we never really pursued. And so I am at this point in my life where I have no regrets, but yet I'm still wanting to do and learn and educate and, like you say, travel, because that is a wonderful way to really get to know the world. And that's where you realize that we live in a pretty awesome world. I like getting out there and rubbing shoulders with people in different countries and learning from them and seeing their cultures. And so I certainly agree with you there.
Yeah, and I've gotten this great opportunity to move out here to our tiny house in a place that is very, very cross-cultural, right? New Mexico was the first settlers came up from Mexico, the Spanish, right, in the 1500s. And so there's a lot of beautiful old architecture from that time period. But going back even further, there's all of these beautiful archaeological sites from people who lived here in 1000 AD, right? And so you get to explore like all the native tradition that has developed here, that's mixed with the Spanish influence, it's mixed with the Mexican influence, as Mexico had control of this area for a while. And then the U.S. took control in 1812. And so there's a lot of history and there's a lot of blend and there's a lot of beautiful elements of herbs and native remedies and native foods and what grows here in the soil based on the climate and the building technology. Like I mentioned, the adobe, right? That's the traditional building technology here. And so I feel like even in this little place that I am, it is like traveling to a whole different country. And so I'm getting to sort of immerse myself in the culture, in the region, in the building, in the food, all of the things. And it is just a wonderful exploration of a different part of our own country.
You live in the land of enchantment.
Yes. I feel enchanted. Can you tell?
Yeah.
When I was a little boy, I always loved to see crashing waves, the tropical sky, and the wind blowing in the trees. All these beautiful things we find in Hawaii are one of a kind, they can't be beat, and they make life oh so sweet. The juice from the fruit, the smell of the flower, nothing could be better than the opposite of sour. There is always a little bit of sweetness in everything. When I was a little boy, I always loved to see the crashing waves, the tropical sky, and the wind blowing in the trees. All these beautiful things we find in Hawaii are one of a kind, they can't be beat, and they make life oh so sweet. The juice from the fruit, the smell of the flower, nothing could be better than the opposite of sour. There is always a little bit of sweetness in everything. Make every day the best that you can. It may even be the best you ever had. By so fast, we all should stop to see all the things we miss each day. It's what makes life so happy. Appreciate the people, your friends and family. Be sure to give them your aloha, 'cause it makes life oh so sweet. From the fruit, the smell of the flower, nothing could be better than the opposite of sour. There is always a little bit of sweetness in everything. The juice from the fruit, the smell of the flower, nothing could be better than the opposite of sour. There is always a little bit of sweetness in everything. There is always a little bit of sweetness in everything.
Hey, I think maybe this is time that we talk a little bit more about the tiny homes and about, maybe why. I mean, it seems obvious, right? Why the tiny home movement is becoming so popular, but I guess some of the advantages of the tiny home, because as I've listened to a couple of your episodes, I mean, you had somebody that was living for a time. They lived out of a van and drove around and did that kind of traveling. But a lot of the tiny homes, they're on wheels and you can actually move them if you want to. So maybe talk about some of those types of things and give us a little bit of a background and a history on tiny homes.
Sure. Yeah. So the tiny home movement has been around for a long time. And actually, there's other parts of the world where, homes are much smaller. So, the idea of living in a smaller space is certainly not new, but I think it's a lot about value shift. So, younger people or, even older people these days are wanting to spend more time in multi-generational, right? People that are retired, they want to spend more time with their kids and grandkids. Young people want to be able to travel more. They want experiences over things. It just seems like that there's a shift for, a subset of people around what is most important to them. And a single family home in one location doesn't serve that purpose. And so tiny homes have really come in to serve those different values. And there's a whole like spectrum of ways that you can live tiny. So one of my earlier podcast episodes with a woman who does full-time house sitting. So she just moves around from house sit gig to house sit gig. She has no actual home of her own, rented or owned. And so there's that, people are digital nomads or living out of Airbnbs, moving around from place to place. Also no permanent long-term home option. People are living in vans. There's 3 million people in van life, according to the statistics on the interwebs. And then there's people living in schoolies, which are bus conversions. And then there's tiny homes like what I'm in that range in size from being portable and towable around the country to being park models, which are wider than can go down the interstate on a regular basis and are kind of more permanently placed in a community or potentially on your own land. So lots of different spectrums in the tiny house, but what it really comes down to is that shift of values. Also, people wanting to have a simpler life. I mean, let's face it, being a human these days is really complex. You're dealing with a lot of different things all the time, and just keeping track of all the stuff that you own and your home maintenance and for us, my homeowner's insurance has been just a catastrophic issue. And so, sorting out all of those things is a big burden. And so if you can simplify your life, just have less stuff, live in a simpler manner, then you can spend your time and energy doing things that resonate more with you. There's also the sustainability factor. So a lot of people are thinking about their footprint. I know that I was cooling a lot of rooms in my American dream house that I was not using. And so how do we, build our space around what is more practically applicable to how we live our lives? We can do that through, different tiny home solutions. Obviously the cost. So the average home last year was, over $400,000. And a tiny home, even a super nice one, maybe is $150,000. You can certainly spend more. You can certainly spend way less, but that's a third of the cost. And so that's just a third of the work you have to do in order to pay for the roof over your head. Mm-hmm. So lots and lots of different reasons to consider this as an option.
I think another thing that really needs to be touched on, because you did touch on a little bit, 2007, you bought a home. Immediately started losing value. Mm-hmm. I know that when I had a mortgage payment, there's stress involved. There's anxiety because you see that home maybe going down in value. We bought a home in 2005. It went up for about 18 months and then just started down. And we owned that home from 2005 until 2018. When we sold that home in 2018, we sold it for less than we paid for it in 2005. 13 years. So I understand that side of it too. And certainly there is a freedom that comes from not having to worry about that mortgage payment. And man, I'm telling you, it's wonderful. The tiny home concept, I totally get it. I mean, I have friends who live in tiny homes. I just totally am fascinated by the tiny home concept because like you say, around the world, people don't typically live in these 2 and 3 and 4 and 5,000 square foot homes. They have much smaller homes. We don't need that space. Like you said, you were cooling a lot of rooms that you didn't even utilize. So yeah, I can see why the tiny home. I have a friend named Wade that lives in Hawaii, and he, for years, has been talking about, he lives on the island of Oahu, a lot of people, super congested, traffic, high prices. And for years, he's talked about doing a tiny home on the Big Island of Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And he sent me plans. I've seen like you did, where he's doing the blueprints and all that kind of stuff. He's looking at storage containers and then taking those and turning those into tiny homes. Have you dealt with folks who've used the storage containers as a way of getting tiny homes?
So I haven't yet interviewed anybody on my podcast. I have someone coming up, Julie. She's going to be on my podcast soon, who's done a storage container home here on my property in New Mexico. We bought 2 40-foot shipping containers, and we built a shop barndominium because my husband had all of his construction and tools. And so we bought 2 shipping containers, and then we built a second story above them where my stepson is living in his own space. And so that has kind of been our way of solving for his living and for the storage and workshop and stuff for my husband, which was a great project. Definitely, there are pros and cons to shipping containers from a climate perspective. So that's something definitely to do research about. But I do want to go back to a couple of your points. One is that when we talk about, minimalism, every time we turn on the market news, which I do on a weekly or on a daily basis, right? Because I'm a, financial planner, we hear that 70% of the economy is based on the consumer. So we are definitely taught from everywhere that our job is to consume. It is to shop. That is our job, right? It is to shop and to be buying things. And I think that does, people a significant disservice when they're so focused on shopping and consuming and, having all of the latest and greatest gadgets, because it does create that stress that you were talking about, right? When you have bills to pay, it does take away from your enjoyment of your life. And we are all working on, creating a lifestyle that we're all working on trying to create happiness for ourselves, right? And so when we have debt, whether that's, shopping debt or housing debt, even though they call mortgage debt good debt, generally they call it good debt, it is still weighs on you. It weighs on you so much that you're always working to get rid of that debt. And so when you can become financially free, then you can do all kinds of things. Like you can take more risk. You can start your own business. You can focus on the impact you want to have in the world instead of working for the paycheck that pays for the roof. And so this is why I really think that the minimalism and having less stuff is so freeing for so many people. And I love to talk about this. And then back to the point of the housing market, I think we have a lot of religion around home equity in this country, and that we think that home equity solves all the problems. And that is because traditionally people have built a lot of wealth in their home. Home values, depending on which statistics you look at, have, increased by 5.5%, per year. But so much of it is about timing, and the cycles of housing valuations is very different from the cycles of the stock market. For example, the stock market, generally 3 good years, 1 bad year. We certainly had a huge bad, Great Recession situation that a lot of us remember. But housing does cycle in these huge blocks of time, and you can really get caught up in that if you're not going to stay in your home forever. And most people don't plan on staying in their home forever because they're moving around for work, or they're moving around for, to be closer to family or what have you. And I'm in that exact same situation once again that I was in one time before, when I bought this house in 2018. It went up and up and up with the pandemic, craziness. And now we are having such a hard time selling the house that we're trying to sell now that we've transitioned to tiny, that I'm still paying the mortgage on. I'm still paying the homeowner's insurance. I'm still paying the taxes. The carrying costs on it are hugely significant. And we're just having to drop the price because we're having this weird moment in time where we listen to the news and it tells us, oh, we have this housing shortage and nobody can get into homes. There's not enough inventory out there, but mortgage rates are 7%. And so people just don't feel comfortable taking on that kind of payment. And so here I am caught in this thing that I have no control over. I have no control over the Federal Reserve. I have no control over buyers. All I have control over is the price, which is reducing the equity that I'm going to be able to take away and create my future out of. And so it is very stressful. Property, real estate, because all of your eggs are in that one basket, and that one basket is being batted around by economic conditions outside of your control, can be so stressful and so emotional. And so if we can just buy a more affordable structure that serves us as our housing, and then figure out how else we can contribute to our community, build a beautiful life with our money, I think that is just a far more holistically healthy and mentally healthy way to live our lives.
And I would agree with everything you just said, because, again, as we get older, we gain experience. I would do things much differently if I was, going back and starting over again. Yeah. I mean, your advice is really good, because the stress and the anxiety that come from home ownership, you can control that. And if you choose to make a purchase of something that is more focused on needs than wants, I think long-term, you're going to be happier.
I totally agree.
Well, hey, listen, I sure appreciate you taking the time today to talk about tiny homes and tell us your story. First of all, I'm a big fan of the life story. I really like that part of it. But as I've done these podcasts, and like I mentioned before, this is number 124 with you, I've kind of learned to also enjoy, what people have done with their lives. So, like you say, you've become passionate about the tiny home movement. Who would have thought that, 20, 30 years ago for you?
Yeah, for sure. And as I had that crisis point in the pandemic, right, where I was in the corporate environment and doing, following the path there and, looking at my dashboard of my progress, I just realized that I was just still following the path that I was expected to follow and not getting to share my own voice and my own perspective, that I only could share the voice that was, pre-approved content and that I had a lot to say. And so that is where the risk part of enabling risk through tiny living, right? Switching from having, the big mortgage and the American dream to the tiny house allowed me to start my own firm focused on the tiny living community and help people make this transition to more financial freedom through having a smaller home and create content, right? So that's why I have my podcast and I write mostly weekly on LinkedIn, and I'm working on a book project. And all of these things are me finally being able to speak from my own voice because I've never been in a position to have an opinion before. So in the military, of course, you can't speak from your own voice. You have to, toe the line there. And then, being in all these corporate environments, you toe the line and you say what you're supposed to say. And now I get to say what I truly feel. And I just love having that in this moment because I get to feel very authentic. I get to live in a place where I can walk outside and hike with my dogs every day, which is pretty much the definition of wealth to me, is having a little bit more time flexibility to take my dogs out into the canyon. And I get to help other people, sort of think outside the box about what makes them most happy. So that is what I have done with my life, is that I have followed the rules and I have gone on the path and I have done what I was told. And then I have seen that wasn't working for me. And I have reimagined, well, what is truest to me and how can I make that work?
Yep. And sometimes in life, we just need to pivot, right?
Yes. Lots of pivoting all together.
So listeners, if you want to learn more about tiny homes and really all the different kinds of tiny home opportunities, listen to the podcast, Less House, More Moola. I like that. I like that title. Less house, more moolah.
My dad used to use that word a lot, moolah. I don't know, but alliteration, I guess, works for people when you have rhyming. So it just popped out one day and that's how it got its name.
Well, and I don't know if maybe it is kind of an age thing, but I knew exactly what it meant when I saw it. So. All right, Laura. Hey, thanks so much again for taking the time to tell your story today and educate us a little bit more about tiny homes and really appreciate it. And I know the listeners are going to appreciate it as well.
Well, thank you, Larry. It was a great conversation. Thanks for being a great host.
You're welcome. All right, everyone. Hey, check back in 2 weeks. We'll have another interesting and unique guest here on Nobody Knows Your Story. Aloha.
Not far away, let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Let's talk story.
Let's talk story. Talk